The crumb cake quilt is one of my absolute favorites to put together. To do it in a quilt as you go quilt, oh my word, this is so much fun. Hi friends, Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. It's a good one today, friends. You don't want to miss a second of it. I'm going to attach the binding onto this quilt. You watch the tutorial, and I'll meet you at the end for a final reveal of this quilt. Enough talking already. Let's make this quilt as you go crumb cake quilt with hidden sashing. Today's inspiration for this quilt came from Pinterest. The colors anyways. So I came across this color palette and it just spoke to me big time. I knew I didn't want to buy really any brand new fabric for this project. I wanted to use what I had already. So I went on the search in my stash for all different fat quarters in all different shades of the color in this picture. If I came across like a half a yard of something, I cut it into a fat quarter and I used it. I even cut some of my yardage up too. When you're pulling all of this fabric from your stash and you're going to use like over 30 different fabrics in a quilt, you want to make sure that you balance your darks, mediums, and lights in both of those colors. For my quilt, I wanted all of the balance to be scattered within the quilt. The best way to do this is to line up all of your fabrics that you chose, take a picture, and then go to your camera setting and turn it into black and white. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and let me tell you, this color to black and white, it's a game changer in quilting, especially if you're trying to balance. Fat quarters, when you buy them, they come wonky. It's just a fact. So you need to square up your fat quarters or your yardage or whatever you're cutting because you want to have clean lines to begin with. For this quilt, you're going to take all of your fat quarters in both colors and slice them in random widths. Be sure and turn your fabric longwise so you get a bunch of strips. Now these random strips, they can be 2 inches, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 3 3/4, 4, 4.5. It's probably best to stay within 2 to 2.5 inches up to 4.5 inches in strip width for this particular quilt. So you can see here I had all of my strips cut out and I was ready to go. After you've sliced all of your strips in different random widths, 3 from one color and 3 from the other, place them how you want to see them. I did like the aqua, red, aqua, the red color, aqua, and the red color. So just get groups of 6 just like that and you'll have a lot. One tip I can give you is this cardboard right here. I cut it out and I laid all of my groupings on it. It made it real easy to transfer back and forth to my sewing machine. All I did was just lay them out this way in a grouping and then this way and this way, so I knew that that grouping went together. So all I'm going to do is just grab these 2 here. This is number 1 and number 2, so to speak, in the grouping, and I'm going to place right sides together and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch. Now you just want to make sure that you sew the same 1/4 inch from start to absolute finish down here. Finger press right at the sewing machine. I know that the next one is going to be this one. To make sure that all of your seams are nice and even throughout the entire strip, you're going to sew, say this end right here, these 2 together, you're going to sew all the way down. Well, in the next seam, you want to start here and sew all the way down. So you're just going to alternate seams. It really does help to do that. Finger press here at the sewing machine. The next strip. Now you can pin if you'd like. I didn't, but you can. Now you definitely want to press everything nice and crisp after you've sewn these strip sets together. Once you have your strip set all nicely pressed, you are going to trim the side. I come all the way to the edge to where I get the most out of the fabric strip, and then I line up on the lines on my ruler on the line of the strip set. because I don't want this to be wonky blocks. I want it to be nicely squared off the best that I can. I don't know, it's always a challenge for me, but I do try. Then turn it, and now you're going to cut those random strips again in different widths. So here I'm going to slice a 2.5 inch width strip, and I'm checking to make sure that the lines on my ruler match up with these seam lines here, the best that it can. Now they won't always line up because we're human, so don't think they're always going to line up, because they don't. That's just fantasy world, friends. And then I think I'm going to go 3 inches next. Again, I'm lining up, making sure that everything lines up the best that it can. Now I think I want to go 3 1/4. I mean, they're just totally random. You just want to make them all different so that everything just looks scattered. That was 4 inches. Looks like I can get a 4 1/4 out of the end of this piece, and that's what I'm going to do. On mine, I went 2.5 inches up to 4.5 inches on all of my strips. For the backing fabric of my Quilt As You Go, I did choose a really busy flannel fabric. I wanted it to be super soft on the back. With this really busy print, you're not going to see a lot of those lines that we're making on the front. I connected my batting and my flannel fabric backing with 505 adhesive spray. When you do that, it's best to make sure that everything is spread out the best that it can be. The flannel itself tends to adhere to the cotton batting really good anyways, so if you don't have 505, I think you'll be okay. I need to find the middle of this quilt sandwich. What I'm going to do is just fold in half, and then fold in half again. And on this corner mark right here, I'm just going to take a pencil and just quickly make a mark. And I know that this is my center and this is where I want to start. Grab your strips that you just cut and grab a bin to throw all of the cutoffs in. The cutoffs are very important in this quilt because this is what we're going to make our hidden sashing from. The first thing you're going to do is find one of your bigger strips, and you're going to cut off a focal point for this particular block. This is going to help us keep straight, and just trim it as close as you can to the seam right there, and just set this one aside because we'll use this in another block. It's not ready for the cutoff box because there's still a lot left on this. Now what you'll do is take this piece that you just cut, square it up if it's not square, find the center of this tiny block right here, fold in half, and then fold in half again. And I can tell that that's the center right there. You're going to match up that center with that dot. This can be any size, it doesn't matter. It can even be 2 inches if you want it to be that. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that you stand up and you look to make sure that it is squarely straight, if that's even a term, on this rectangle piece of quilt sandwich. And just nudge it whichever way it needs to go. Now you can put grid lines in this, and what I mean by that is just take a ruler and mark on your actual quilt sandwich. Those guides will help you keep your squares and rectangles and strips all straight on your quilt sandwich. The way that I'm going to build this block is from center to right and then go clockwise all the way around and then start over again. So you have your pile and you're just going to grab random strips. You just want to make sure that it's not, the same strip as that right there. Now it can even be an orangey color, and this is an orangey color too. It ends up all over the place, so it doesn't really matter too much. Once I find that that's going to fit good there, I know I'm going to have to cut that. So I'm just going to flip this and make sure that that is straight. How I make sure that this is straight, just so you know, I know that this edge is perfectly straight. I cut it. I know it's straight. I mean, as straight as it can be anyways. I want to make sure that if there's a seam right under it, that there is the same amount of space within there. And you can eyeball that. I mean, it's not that hard. If it looks crooked, shift it. For cutting this strip to make sure that it's even, what I do is pull back like this, line it up with the rest of its strip self, finger crease, and then I go in and I cut right along that finger press. And typically, you know, it's pretty straight at that point. So that is right sides together, and I'm working to the right and clockwise. I do utilize my really long pins for this one. I feel like longer pins work really well. Lift it up to your sewing machine, and then you're just going to sew a 1/4 inch right along the edge that you just made. Take it over to your pressing station. Going to press after each addition to this block. Now you may need a pressing cloth for the first few because you don't want to hit the hot iron on your batting. Now we're going to put a strip this way. So I'm going to turn this. Now the piece that I'm going to be putting on next is to the right of this. And when you have one where there's a seam right there, you know, try to shift it to where the seams are not right on top of each other. So I'm just going to flip this. I'm going to line that up best that you can. I put the crease there because I feel like I always cut it wonky when I don't have a guide. I mean, sometimes I do go in and just cut it without finger creasing it, but a lot of times it, you know, it doesn't work to my advantage not to do that. So this one I'm going to lift up as well. These pieces right here that we just cut off, they can go in the cutoff pile for our secret hidden sashing. Right over to your ironing station, lift up, give it a good press first with your fingers, and then bring your iron in. See how now we can lay our iron on there and it's not going to hurt our batting. These pieces to the right of me, so we're going clockwise. So I'm just turning it so that those two colors contrast and these two, because they didn't do it. If I put it this way, you're putting, you know, those together and those together. I don't want that. So I'm going to bring this up to where the seams on this are not going to get in the way with these seams. So I think I'm going to eliminate that red altogether and lift. It's important to note that what I'm looking at here is that these are parallel with this edge right here, because I know that this is straight. So I'm looking to make sure that it looks squarish here and here, that nothing's like majorly off, like it's like this or something, because I don't want that. So I'm just going to line up, and you may have to, you know, shimmy one way or the other to get it straight. Now I can visibly see that I'm going to be cutting on the seam here, so I'm not going to bring it up and crease it. I don't need to. And this one here too, because this was a cut off from something else, I can see the seam there. So I'm just going to cut right alongside it. So we went, these two we laid down together, then we went here, here, and here, and now we're going over here. And then once you find that your seams aren't, you know, going to bother each other, then lift it up and line up your edge. Important to note that sometimes you'll have overhang, and that happens. It's okay. I'm still looking over here to make sure that this edge right here, even though it's flipped over on its wrong side is facing up, that this edge is parallel with that line, these lines, that everything, you know, looks really good. I don't do anything but eyeball it. That's the best that I do when I do that. So because if I can see it, then everybody else can see it, right? Now this one I'm going to go ahead and cut off because it's right next to the seam, and I can use that as my guide. This one goes in the cutoff pile. This one I will lift up. I want you to see what I mean by parallel. I want you to look, oh, I'm going to lift it out here in a minute and show you, but this edge right here, I want it parallel with, say, like that seam right there. And so I'm looking at the overall look of it to make sure that I have everything nice and squared up, best that it can be. And when I think I have it, then I sew it. I commit. The crumb cake quilt is one of my absolute favorites to put together. To do it in a quilt as you go quilt, oh my word, this is so much fun. So we just added, what did we just add in? See, I forget. We just added this piece in, so now I'm going to turn it like this. The goal on the edges of these blocks as you're quilting as you go, it's okay to leave like a 1/4 inch as long as it's going to be facing inside of the quilt and it's not an outer edge. But those outer edges, you want to make sure that they're all the way to the edge with fabric. I'm going to go with this one. So I'm just going to check there, make sure all my seams aren't bothering each other. I'm checking for parallel lines here. So I need a longer strip up here. Make sure none of your seams are fighting. Also, you don't have to backstitch when you make these because you're going to be crossing over that seam that you started on the last strip. It locks everything in, so no worries there. It's time to add this side on. Here's a shot of the back just so you can see what it looks like as we quilt as we go. So we just did that one. Now it's time to do this side. This is what we have so far. Looking good. So in order to get my 16 by 20, I'm going to get really close with this edge right here and make sure I have a little bit of overhang. And if I measure from this 16 mark here, I'm going to have a little bit of batting within there, but that's okay because it's on an inside block. The first thing I'm looking at though is my lines within the ruler here. Now I can see I'm pretty straight there, but I'm not straight there. So I'm going to shimmy this ruler a little bit that way so I can line up my lines. I know this side is for sure cut straight, so I'm going to turn it this way. Now this is going to be hidden within that sashing, so no worries. Now I'm going to line it up with the for sure 16-inch mark on my mat and come over here and find 16. Now let's go in for that 20-inch mark. I'm going to feel for the batting here, make sure that it's hanging over a little bit there, my quilt sandwich. Here's the block all trimmed up and ready to be attached and sashed to the next one. So look at the back. Looks good. You just have some tails that need to be cut off. That's it. No biggie. Let's get to making those hidden sashing strips. What you'll do is take that bin where you had all of those cut off pieces and you'll pull out random ones and just start building on a strip. The thing is with this though, you want to make sure that you add a couple together, slice it and add them in so it gives it more depth within the strip so it doesn't look like it's just one big long strip just slapped on the quilt. It's important to note too that I did make random widths of these strips. So every time I had to connect a block together, I made it 2 inches or 3 inches or 3.5 inches. So that way it didn't, you know, have all of the same secret hidden sashing strips within the quilt. After a strip was fully done in the length that I needed, I then put 1/8 of an inch of a stay stitch down one side. This helped keep all the seams together for me, because what I was doing next was folding up that same side that I put the stay stitch on. I folded it up about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch, and I pressed it real good. Next, it was time to cut up some backing strips for this quilt. All of my backing strips were 1 inch wide, and they were a little bit longer than the length I needed to connect the blocks together. What you'll do is just take that 1 inch backing strip and place it to the right side of the backing along the edge there, and you're going to sew a true 1/4 inch. Now, a true 1/4 inch is very important when it comes to sashing strips. You need to make sure that it's a 1/4 inch, because we are going to grab a 1/4 inch from the other side, which makes those two fabrics butt together perfectly. After the backing strip is all sewn on, give it a good press in the direction that it needs to go. Then lift that sashing strip piece up onto the other quilt block, the backing part. So it'll be right side of sashing strip to right side back of backing. Oh my word. You know what I mean, right? Be sure to pin real good, because we don't want any problems when we get to the sewing machine. Here is where you're going to sew another true 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you sew too much, then it will be all bunched up in the center of where those two blocks meet up. And if you don't sew enough, there's going to be a huge gap there, and you don't want that either. You just want to be to the true 1/4 inch. And you can see there right down the center, I am perfectly dead on. Those are butting up perfectly. There's a shot of the back, looks real good. I cut about 1 inch in width strips of this lightweight, one-sided fusible interfacing. I think it was made by Pellon. It's called 291. This really helped keep those seams nice and flat, and all I did was just lightly press them down, so that way when it was time to put on the sashing, everything just laid perfectly. Now with this sashing, depending on how wide you made yours, you can shift it either right or left depending on where you would like to see it. And here I'm kind of auditioning where I want it to land, and that will tell me where I want to start sewing it down onto the block. And so that just gave you a little wiggle room there. Once I, found out where I would like it, then I went ahead and pinned it. I sewed a 1/4 inch down that seam, and you can see there it's all attached. Once it's attached and sewn, then you're going to flip it over and pin it, and you're going to sew very close on that crease, so it's almost not even noticeable. Now that crease that you're sewing is the crease that you folded over that 1/4 or 1/2 an inch. Once the hidden sashing is all attached, then it's time to just trim those blocks up. Use your longest ruler. It really does help. Okay, let's take a look at the back of this. I think it looks pretty good with that busy fabric on there. What do you think? Can you see the sashing? So out of 32 fat quarters, this is all that's left. I could have totally gotten a few more sashings out of this. They'll just go in the scrap bin for another scrap quilt. For the binding on this quilt, I'm using the same fabric that I used on the backing, which is this flannel. This binding is cut at 1 3/4 inch in width. I'm totally loving the way that this binding turns out, being that it's a lot less fabric around the edges. It just takes out a lot of that stiff bulk. Typically use a glue stick to fold the one side over 1/2 an inch and then put the glue right along there and then press it. That helps hold that quilting cotton down. But I'm finding that with this flannel, it folds on itself just really good. So there's no need for a glue stick. The other thing that I use to attach the binding onto the back first is this presser foot, and this is the Compensating Presser Foot by Juki. It has the chunky side on the side of the foot that holds this fabric in perfectly. What you'll do is just line up your raw edges together, right side to right side, and you can see that's still folded. Now you're going to just lift your presser foot up and lay it back down so the chunky side is literally holding that edge. So that way it's not going to veer off this way. So when I sew, I can sort of shove this fabric toward this chunky side. And it's not going to, you know, make my fabric do anything weird. It's going to give me, though, a perfect 1/4 inch, and that's what I want. So you can see there where I've sewn it, and I'm going to flip it just to give you an idea. So then you have this piece right here, and then you're just going to lift that over, and then you're going to top stitch all the way around. And you can see that makes a really nice binding. It is a little thicker on this side, but I don't mind that at all. Hopefully this is a better view of that compensating presser foot. It really is amazing. All these links to everything that I'm talking about in today's video, they'll all be down below. Everything is easily found. You're going to deal with the mitered corners just like you would with any other quilt. When you stop at a 1/4 inch at the end, you're then going to sew off of the edge there at a diagonal right to the point. I'm guesstimating 1/4 inch, lift up, turn so that the point is now facing you, and sew right to the edge of that point and lift out. So I've sewn a 1/4 inch down, stopped a 1/4 inch from the end, and then sewed diagonal right to the point, right off of the quilt. The next step for perfect binding is to lift this up like so. What you're looking for is a straight edge right along here. This should all be parallel, the quilt edge and the binding edge. There's a ruler on my sewing machine table, which is very handy. I never usually use it, but for this, I'm gonna. And just give that a finger press right there. Then you're going to hold here and lift that binding back onto itself. Pinch right here and lay it parallel along the edge there. So hopefully you can see. Leaves me with this beautiful mitered corner, you'll see. Hold here or pin and twist your quilt around and start right off of the edge. And everything is lined up here, nice and straight, and push against that compensating presser foot. So let's see what this is going to look like. So you can see there, that's where we started, and we sewed right from the edge and kept going. So then when it's time to turn it around, all you do is put your finger in there and just flip it. And that's what that back looks like. And you'll see that there's a crease there that's open. Now you want the crease on the other side to go the opposite way. So if I flip it like this, I can see here the crease is open this way. So I want this crease to open that way. Fold this one over this way, and then go right up to that edge and fold in this way. You can see there it gives a really nice miter in the front and the back. Now I do put my regular presser foot back on when I bind the top part of this quilt. The only way to get the full picture of this quilt from top to bottom was to turn my camera in portrait mode. Are you taken away by the beauty of this quilt? I know I am. And it's not because I made it. It's because it's a scrappy crumb quilt. For whatever reason, our eyes just love this. I mean, if you love a scrappy quilt, then you know what I'm talking about. Maybe some of you skilled quilters out there will be able to spot the sashing in this quilt. But when it's on a bed or snuggled around someone, no one's even going to be none the wiser. I have a favor to ask of you, friends. YouTube has put a new button down below all these videos. Now, this button supposedly is supposed to light up when I say a certain word. Now, mind you, I have not said this certain word in probably 2 years on my channel. I just don't do it because I feel like if you want to do it, you can do it and you will do it. Let's test it out. The word starts with the letter S. You have a permission, if you already are this S thing, to go ahead and click it and re-click the S word again to make sure that, you know, you are the S thing. So I'm getting ready to say that word, and you tell me if it lights up and is, you know, whatever YouTube's trying to do. I don't know. But I'm going to say the word, and you hit the button, and you let me know. Subscribe to the sewing channel. Now, when I said that word, it was supposed to do something fun, so I don't know. Until next time on the sewing channel, take care.